Today I'm going to talk about communicating during cyber attacks, specifically for NGOs and community groups, and the session has 3 parts. Firstly, I'll talk about why cyber attacks are communications issues, not just IT ones. Secondly, I'll go through key principles for responding well based on real-world experience and research. And thirdly, I'll talk about what your organisation can do now to prepare so you're not figuring out everything in the middle of a crisis. Cyber attacks are unfortunately not rare, and they're not just happening to big corporates or government agencies. They're happening constantly to organisations of all sizes, including charities and community groups. In New Zealand, thousands of cyber incidents are reported every year, and a significant number involve financial loss or data exposure. And globally, ransomware and other malicious cyber activity has exploded over the last few years. So realistically, for organisations, it's now not a question of if something will happen, it's when something will happen. And for NGOs, the risk is particularly serious. Sometimes we may not have the strongest IT resources, and we hold deeply personal information about donors, volunteers, clients, people we serve, people who are often already vulnerable. And that means cyber incidents are not just technical failures, they're trust events. There are plenty of examples of NGOs who have been hit by cyber attacks. In the international setting. Overseas, the International Committee of the Red Cross saw data of 500,000 people who had been displaced and disconnected from their families. During conflict, their data was exposed. Anglicare in Australia, where client data was compromised. And in the US, Planned Parenthood, where highly sensitive patient information was targeted. Some of you might be thinking, why would a cyber attacker want to target our NGO in little old New Zealand? We have no money, we have no reason to be targeted, but attackers aren't always state actors or highly coordinated groups chasing millions. They can be small groups or individual hackers looking for 10K or 100K, or they could be motivated ideologically by something your charity does or doesn't do. Think of the recent example in New Zealand of Medimap a couple of months ago. So for those of you who aren't aware, Medimap is a cloud-based digital platform used widely across New Zealand and Australia to manage medication in care settings such as aged residential care, hospices and disability services. In this incident, unauthorised access led to patient records being altered, including some individuals being incorrectly marked as deceased. There was no ransom demand, and the motive is still unclear for this, and it's a really good example that attackers aren't always chasing money. Cyber attacks can be political, ideological, or just disruption. So some of you might be wondering why I'm the person up here talking about this. In 2021, I was the communications lead on the Ministry of Health's emergency response team for the Waikato District Health Board cyber attack response, working alongside Waikato and the National Cybersecurity Centre within the GCSB. That incident has been described as the biggest attack in New Zealand's history. I'm sure many of you will remember it. It was a ransomware attack that took down hospital systems across the region, which serves 1 million people. Cancer treatment systems became completely unusable, surgeries were postponed, patients had to be transferred to other hospitals for care. Doctors were using pen and paper and couldn't access patient data, and hugely sensitive patient information was posted on the dark web, breaching people's privacy. The response lasted for months, and it was honestly one of the most complex and stressful crisis responses I've ever worked on. That experience had such a profound impact on me that I went on to complete a Masters of Science in Strategic Communication overseas. And as part of this, I wrote an award-winning dissertation on communicating during cyber attacks, which used the Waikato District Health Board as a case study. And now through my own little consultancy, Baines, part of what I do is supporting purpose-driven organisations to prepare for cyber incidents from a comms perspective. I've spent most of my career working in NGO and purpose-driven comms, so I see very clearly the relevance of this issue and the gap in preparedness for NGOs. And I found a lot of cyber guidance is written for corporates or well-resourced organisations, but NGOs are working in very different contexts. So rather than just telling you how cyber incidents unfold, I want to walk you through one together as if it's happening to your organisation right now. I'll reveal each development one stage at a time, and after key developments, I'll ask, what would you do? What would you say? I'd love to hear from you guys. So there are no trick questions. This is just about getting you thinking about how it feels at different stages of the response, the early response, and the decisions that you have to make. So let's imagine your organisation is a community health charity. You provide mental health and wellbeing support, things like counselling, family support, and outreach services. You work with people who are already in quite vulnerable situations, maybe dealing with trauma, family violence, or financial loss, stress. You hold client records, case notes, contact details, and sensitive patient information. You have donor databases and volunteer records, including police vetting and ID documents. You're also working with other agencies, referrals from hospitals, oranga tamariki, and community providers, so your systems are connected in different ways. It's just a normal Tuesday morning. Things are feeling pretty normal. People are coming in, logging on, getting on with their days. Then your IT person notices something a little unusual on the server. Nothing dramatic, just something doesn't look quite right. Around the same time, a couple of staff mention that they can't open certain files. Someone else says the shared folder looks a bit different and your website is behaving strangely. It's slow and it's not really loading properly. At this point, no one's panicking. It could just be a glitch. It could be anything really. It could be human error, could be something small. But there is a sense that something isn't quite right and no one yet knows how serious it could be. So first question. At this moment, before you know anything for certain, what do you do? Do you tell staff? Do you say anything to anyone outside of your organisation? Do you wait? Keen to get thoughts, just instinct at this point. Bit of unusual activity on the server. Hold those thoughts. Let's see what happens next. Then you get a call from a journalist. They say your organisation's name has appeared on a dark web leak site and they've been contacted by someone claiming to have your data. The journalist starts asking some pretty scary questions. Have donor bank account details been leaked? Have client records been taken? Are volunteer police checks and passport photos out there? You don't even know how to access the dark web, let alone whether any of this is true. So at this point, you've got a journalist on the phone right now. What do you say? Do you confirm anything? Do you deny it? Do you ask for time? Who in your organisation even deals with this call? Keen to hear thoughts from a few of you. Fair enough. Okay, hold those thoughts because it gets even more complicated. Then your staff start seeing ransom notes on their screens and in shared folders. Files have weird extensions and nothing opens. The message says your systems are encrypted and they've also copied all of your data. They give you a link to a website on the dark web and a countdown timer, and they say if you don't pay a ransom, they'll start releasing information publicly. They also email your general inbox and directly contact senior leaders. And then it gets personal, and you still have a journalist waiting to call you back. So for charities and NGOs, the ethical weight of this is enormous. We hold sensitive data about vulnerable people. The data in question might be refugees' documents, survivors' counselling notes, people's medical histories, details about family violence or financial hardship. And you're sitting here thinking, if this gets published, these people could be re-traumatised, embarrassed, or even put at risk. So now you're not just managing a cyber incident, you are carrying an enormous ethical responsibility for the well-being of others. At the same time, journalists are calling, funders want reassurance, staff are distressed and scared, clients are asking whether their information is safe, and you still don't fully understand what systems are affected or how far the breach goes. You're being forced to communicate publicly while the situation is still unfolding. It's been less than 24 hours since IT first noticed strange activity on your servers. This is why cyber attacks are not just IT problems. They are crisis of trust, safety, ethics, and reputation all happening at once. Communication is happening whether you like it or not, with the attacker, media, staff, and the communities that you serve. And the way that you communicate during these moments can either protect people and preserve trust or seriously compound the harm. So when I asked you in the scenario if you'd say anything when there was a bit of strange activity on the servers and website, some people's instinct would be to wait, others would be to say something internally. If you do wait, sometimes that waiting for certainty means the story gets told without you. And then when the journalist called, the instinct to buy time or say nothing is also completely natural, but silence can get interpreted as secrecy. What the scenario shows us is that communications decisions start before you are ready. And that's why preparation matters so much, which brings me to the playbook. So what I want to share now is a kind of playbook. It's not a checklist of tasks, but it's a set of 10 principles that should guide how you communicate when a cyber incident is unfolding. These come from a mix of real-world response and academic research. And the reason why I focus on principles is because in a cyber incident, no two situations are the same, but these fundamentals seem to stack up across different scenarios. And this encompasses a values-led approach because in cyber incidents, especially in NGOs, the decisions you are making aren't just technical or operational, they have to be ethical. You are dealing with questions like, when do we tell people something has gone wrong? How much do we say? And how do we balance transparency with risk? And ultimately, how do we protect the people we serve, many of whom are already in vulnerable situations? So while there are principles and best practice, a lot of these decisions will also come back to your organization's values, things like honesty, care, accountability, and respect. A values-led approach means those principles guide how you communicate, especially when the situation is uncertain and there isn't a perfect answer. So principle 1, treat it as a trust crisis, not a tech problem. When systems fail, organizations tend to go straight into technical mode. What's broken? How do we fix it? When it will be back up? But the people affected are not experiencing a technical problem. They're experiencing fear, disruption, and uncertainty. They're worried about whether their data is safe, whether services will continue, and whether they're being told the truth. So if your communications focus only on systems and investigations, you miss the emotional reality of what people are going through. Practically, this means your messaging should always answer, what does this mean for people, and what are we doing to protect them? This is also where comms has a really strong role in keeping leadership focused on stakeholder impact, not just operational recovery. Principle 2, acknowledge early, even with limited information. One of the hardest things in cyber incidents is that you rarely have clear information at the start. But waiting for certainty before you speak usually makes things worse, not better. Silence gets interpreted as secrecy or incompetence. Bringing it back to the scenario that we just walked through, I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, when should we have said something publicly? And that's usually where organizations hesitate, making that call. At that first sign of unusual activity, you probably wouldn't go out publicly, although some organizations have. But that is when you should be getting things coordinated internally, setting up a response team, ensuring prepared holding lines still make sense, giving a heads up to your spokesperson. And then as soon as it starts becoming a stakeholder issue, for example, when a journalist calls or there is a credible risk that data may have been leaked, that is when you should acknowledge publicly. And this early acknowledgement doesn't mean speculation. It means saying, we know something has happened, we are investigating, and we will keep you informed. It also means committing to an update rhythm. For example, daily updates at a set time, even if there's not much new to say, that predictability alone can reduce anxiety and stop rumours spreading. Organisations that communicate early tend to maintain more trust, even if the situation later turns out to be more serious than anticipated. So it's not about communicating at the first hint of a problem, it's about not staying silent once it becomes a stakeholder or public issue. Okay, principle 3, be transparent, but don't help the attacker. Transparency is critical in cyber responses, as is best practice in any crisis response. However, cyber attacks have an additional layer of complexity, and this is where things can get really, really interesting. The attacker is often actively watching what you are saying in the media. They're monitoring press statements, press conferences, social media, media interviews, and may even have access to internal communications to staff to see what you are saying and potentially change their behaviour based on that. Attackers have been known to respond to these public statements by escalating behaviour, contradicting organisations publicly, or using information to re-infiltrate systems. I can think of one case in New Zealand where the organisation said in the media that it had a specific part of its system back up and running, and the attacker re-infiltrated it in spite of them. So be very careful about what you provide publicly. For example, be wary of providing information about what parts of your system are back up and running and how you got there. This is where comms and IT must work really closely together to decide what can safely be said and what needs to wait. This isn't about hiding information, it's about not compromising recovery efforts or investigations. And this is where pre-planning really matters, because you don't want to be negotiating transparency versus security for the first time under pressure. And when engaging with the media, don't be afraid to set out the situation clearly. You can say, we are being as transparent, open, and honest as possible, but the attacker is watching what we're saying, and so we have to be really careful about explaining some details about the recovery. I found that journalists are pretty understanding about this. If you're open and upfront about it, they actually appreciate it, and it does build trust. Principle 4, never frame your organisation as a victim. Even when your organisation is clearly the target of a cybercrime, framing yourself publicly as the victim can damage trust. From a stakeholder perspective, the priority is the people whose information or services may have been affected. If communications focus on how unfair or difficult the situation is for your organisation, it can come across as deflecting responsibility, even if that's not what you mean. A better approach is to acknowledge the seriousness of what's happened, accept responsibility for protecting information, and focus on the people impacted. This shift in framing makes a huge difference in how your response is perceived. Principle 5, apologise for impact even if you were attacked. Academic research studying real-life case studies shows organisations that apologise for the impact of a breach are more likely to maintain stakeholder trust and support. And this one can feel really, really uncomfortable, especially when your organisation has done nothing intentionally wrong. But an apology isn't about legal blame. It's about acknowledging that people have been harmed or put at risk. Saying, we're sorry this has happened and we understand the distress this may cause, is about empathy and accountability, not fault. So when organisations refuse to apologise, people often interpret this as not caring, even if that's not true. And in trust-based sectors like NGOs, an apology and empathy are not optional extras, they're fundamental to maintaining credibility. Principle 6, use human language, not cyber jargon. Cyber language can be very alienating. Phrases like unauthorised access, bad actor, or no evidence of exfiltration don't help most people understand what's going on. And when people don't understand your language, they don't feel reassured, they feel shut out. Our role as communicators is to translate technical risk into real-world meaning, what information might be affected, what that could mean, and what people should do. Plain language isn't dumbing things down, It's making sure people can actually protect themselves if needed. Principle 7, prioritise internal communication. Staff and volunteers are often the first point of contact for communities. If they feel confused or unsupported, that anxiety spreads quickly. Internal comms should never be an afterthought in cyber incidents. It should be one of the first priorities. People need to feel supported. They need to know what they can say, what they shouldn't say, and where to send questions. They also need reassurance that leadership understands how stressful the situation is and is supporting them. Principle 8, create a single source of truth. In complex incidents, different teams often hear different messages and different information at different times. Without coordination, that leads to inconsistent messaging, which quickly damages confidence. Establish one central source of agreed facts and messaging and make sure all communications flow from that. Also, as previously mentioned, establish an update cadence so people know when to expect new information. Consistency and predictability are incredibly calming during crises. Principle 9, assume everything could become public. In cyber incidents, information often leaks, sometimes from attackers, sometimes through internal channels. That means internal messages, emails, and briefings should always be written with care. That doesn't mean saying less, it means saying things clearly, accurately, and consistently everywhere. When internal and external messaging align, organisations are far more resilient to leaks and misinformation. Principle 10, show action, not just words. Communication should reflect real action, not just reassurance. People want to see what you are actually doing, offering support, improving systems, and preventing future incidents. Updates should focus not only on what happened, but what is changing as a result. But as previously discussed, the attacker will be watching what you're saying publicly. So the balance is this. You need to communicate that you are taking action without going into too much detail about how you're doing it. Tricky. For example, instead of saying we've restored X system using this method and patched these vulnerabilities, you might say we're working with external cybersecurity experts to restore our systems safely and strengthen our protections. That shows action and reassures people without giving anything away that could be used against you. Put simply, be clear about outcomes and intent, but cautious about methods and specifics. And remember, you're not necessarily trying to prove technical competence in your communications. You're trying to demonstrate responsibility and care. We have talked about how cyber incidents unfold and what good communication looks like in the moment. The good news is there's some very practical things that you can do now that will make an enormous difference if something happens later. Preparation isn't about predicting the exact attack. It's about being ready to communicate clearly, protect people, and make decisions under pressure. So I want to go through some simple steps that any NGO can take to be better prepared. We'll approach some of these practically now as well so that you can leave here more prepared than you were before. One of the most useful things you can have is a simple, practical cyber communications plan. And I really mean simple. This does not need to be a long and complicated document. At its core, it should answer some key questions. Things like, who makes decisions, who approves messaging, and who speaks publicly? It should also set out how information flows, how comms, IT, leadership, and legal connect during a response, because that's often where things slow down or become unclear. In a crisis, people are under pressure. Systems may not be working, and things are moving really quickly, so the plan needs to be easy to find and easy to use. That might mean having a printed copy in a drawer somewhere or a version that's accessible offline. The goal here is not perfection, it's clarity. So that means when something happens, you're not trying to figure out roles and responsibilities from scratch. As part of this plan, you need to draft 3 sets of messages which are ready to go. One internal message to staff, one external holding statement, and one update template. This saves critical time and prevents panic writing. So I want to give you a few minutes now to actually draft your organisation's holding statement. You can use the scenario from earlier, or you can think about your own organisation right now. So your holding statement should acknowledge something has happened, say what you're doing about it, and reassure people their well-being is your priority. And it should be no more than 3 sentences. So grab a pen and paper or write on your phone. Go. So back to the planning. So as part of your planning, your organisation should decide some hard questions in advance. Things like, do we ever pay ransoms? Who decides? When do we notify people affected? And what triggers public updates? These should not be debated in the middle of a crisis. Some of these decisions, like whether to pay a ransom, won't sit with communications, but they will absolutely become communications issues. Our role as communicators is to make sure there is clarity in advance about how the decisions are made and how they will be communicated. Because the worst place to be is trying to figure out both the decision for something hard like that and the messaging at the same time under pressure. So I'd like you now to turn to the person next to you. I want to put one of the hard questions to you directly, because it is one that every organisation needs to think about in advance, and it does not have an easy answer. And it's not a communications decision, but it quickly becomes a communications issue. The question is, would your organisation ever pay a ransom? So if you could chat with someone next to you about this. I'm not looking for a right answer. I want to know what your instinct is and why. So think about things like, never, it funds criminal activity. Straight into it. So as we've just heard, there's not a simple answer. Lots of things to think about. But from a comms perspective, whatever decision is made around a ransom, you may need to explain it publicly to media, stakeholders, and the people affected. So while you don't need to decide this as communicators, you need to understand how the decision is made and how it would be communicated. So back to the planning. One of the biggest challenges in cyber incidents is that you're not communicating with just one audience. You're communicating with many different groups, all with different concerns. Your clients will be asking, is my information safe? What does this mean for me? Donors might be thinking about financial information and trusts in your organisation. Volunteers may be worried about things like police vetting or ID documents. Funders and partners will be looking for reassurance that you're managing the situation well, and regulators will be focused on compliance and process. So a one-size-fits-all message doesn't really work. So it's really important to map your key stakeholders in advance and think about what each group needs to hear and how you'll reach them. Because in a cyber incident, your usual channels might not be available. For example, your website might be down, your online or intranet systems might be compromised. In the Waikato District Health Board incident, email and intranet were not available to communicate with staff, so the comms team at Waikato went old school and printed everything out and stuck them on walls all around the hospitals and ran regular in-person staff meetings. So you need to think ahead. Do we have alternative ways to contact people? Do we have up-to-date contact lists? Can we use email, phone, social media, or even direct outreach if needed? This is really about making sure the right people get the right information at the right time. You also need to plan for privacy obligations. This is a really important one, and it often sits across legal, privacy, and communications. In New Zealand, there are legal requirements to notify people and the Privacy Commissioner if a breach is likely to cause serious harm. But in a crisis, the challenge isn't just what the obligation is, it's how quickly and clearly you can act on it. So it's really important to know in advance who in your organisation is responsible for assessing whether there is a notifiable breach, who is drafting these notifications, and who is actually communicating with people. because those conversations are often some of the most sensitive you'll have. You're telling people that their personal information has been leaked. And from a communications perspective, it's not just about meeting the legal requirement, it's about doing so in a way that is clear, compassionate, and actually helpful. That means explaining what happened, what it means for them, and what they can do next. And ideally, those messages are prepared well in advance because you don't want to be drafting something like that for the first time under pressure. Another way you can prepare is to do a tabletop exercise, even just once a year. It doesn't have to be complicated. You can just walk through a scenario like the one we did today. Systems are down, media's calling, and there's a threat to release data. Then talk through it together as a team. Who gets called first? Who's making decisions? What do we say to staff? And what do we say if a journalist calls?
If I go and type all these notes up, will they have it saved in our OneDrive, or will they be able to
I mean, if you did get targeted, they would have access to everything. But yeah. Yeah, they don't care. Yeah. They know what we do. Yeah.
Let's add on the trial one thing. One great way to run tabletop is to get an AI to write one for you. Just ask ChatGPT to write you one, and they come. It's pretty excellent. And then you're not doing the thinking of running it. You're just doing it. So that's a really simple way to run the tabletop.
So on that tabletop exercise, do focus on those first few hours because that's often the most chaotic and uncertain part of a response. The value of doing this in advance is that it builds confidence and muscle memory. People understand their roles and you're not figuring everything out for the first time under pressure. It also surfaces gaps, things like unclear responsibilities, missing contact lists, or disagreements about what you would say, but in a safe environment where you can fix them before it really matters. Phew. So that takes us to the end of the talk. If there are just 3 things I'd like you to take away from today, it's 1, cyber attacks are trust crises, not just IT problems. Number 2, preparation beats brilliance every time. And thirdly, how you communicate will matter just as much as what actually happened. Remember, even small steps, a draft holding statement, a stakeholder list, a quick scenario walkthrough can dramatically improve how an organisation copes in a cyber crisis. Thank you so much and for being such a lovely group of people. I'm happy to take questions or hear about your own experiences more, and I'm also happy to chat afterwards if anyone wants to talk about preparedness for their organisation.